Cale Donovan had never been what anyone would call patient, but the Virelian traffic patterns were testing him in ways that made him reconsider every life choice that had led him to this point. He was supposed to be on a simple supply run, ferrying hyperelic crates across the city's neon-lit skyways, but the hover trams were all moving like molasses in zero gravity, and the automated traffic drones had developed a sudden fondness for stopping in the middle of intersections, spinning lazily like drunken stars. He muttered under his breath about how the council needed to hire someone who had actually flown a ship in real space instead of someone who thought code enforcement was the pinnacle of tactical genius. The crates rattled ominously behind him, occasionally squeaking like they had opinions about his piloting skills, which he suspected they did. Then he saw her. Elira was standing on the edge of one of the upper platforms, hair, if it could be called that, flowing like liquid silver, and ears long enough that they seemed to have a life of their own, twitching in perfect harmony with her thoughts. She looked at him like he was a malfunctioning drone, which, given his current trajectory, was not entirely inaccurate. Her gaze held something that startled him: curiosity, amusement, and a hint of daring that made his military instincts tingle in a way he didn't like. She didn't move, at least not immediately, and that hesitation was exactly what gave Cale the stupid idea to wave awkwardly, which naturally caused the crates to lurch forward violently, nearly ejecting him from the hovercraft. "Great," he muttered, grabbing the control levers with both hands and muttering something about insurance fraud and gravity violations. Elira's lips twitched. He couldn't tell if she was smiling or just about to call security. "Maybe both," he said aloud, as if that would clarify the situation, which it did not. By the time Cale stabilized the crates, Elira had stepped closer, each footfall deliberate and graceful, her ears flicking like antennas tuned to some frequency he could not even comprehend. "You know," she said, her voice soft but sharp, "the city doesn't usually encourage falling freight to be piloted by clumsy humans." Cale blinked at her, the words forming slowly. "Thanks, that's comforting." He realized too late that this was not exactly a conversation starter for someone he had just almost destroyed with a crate. "Call it a warning," she said, one eyebrow raised, the silver hair glinting under the neon lights. "Or call it pity, I don't really care which." He almost laughed, but his sense of pride intervened. "Almost. Right, pity, I'll file that under galactic morale booster." She laughed anyway, a sound like wind chimes shaken by a mischievous breeze, and Cale felt a curious warmth spread through him, a sensation entirely unrelated to the gravitational flux threatening to collapse his hovercraft under the weight of physics and bad decisions. Their first encounter ended abruptly when a maintenance drone, bright pink and blinking like a candy cane alarm system, whirred into their path. It seemed to have a vendetta against Cale personally. Elira sighed, tugged at a control panel on her wrist, and in a single fluid motion, the drone spun off course, colliding with a street advertisement for synthetic ice cream in a spectacular explosion of holographic sprinkles. Cale stared. "How did you do that?" "I know a guy," she said, smiling, the kind of smile that made long ears wiggle dangerously close to crashing into nearby machinery. "Or maybe the guy knows me, it's complicated." They didn't speak much after that, not in the conventional sense. Cale followed her as she moved with the agility of a cat, each step measured but somehow chaotic enough to keep his attention locked. She led him through alleys stacked with discarded orbital tech, past vendors selling questionable energy drinks that fizzed in anti-gravity, past holograms reciting poetry in languages he was sure were invented solely to confuse tourists. And all the while, her ears twitched at every sound, every hum of electricity, every whisper of wind that might have carried a hint of danger or desert. Cale wasn't sure. By the time they reached a quiet rooftop overlooking the sprawling neon city below, Cale had convinced himself of several things. First, he was undeniably attracted to the alien woman with the impossibly long ears. Second, he had absolutely no idea what she was doing in the middle of this sector. And third, if he didn't say something soon, he might be stuck following her around like some overcooked drone, getting his pride hurt in the process. "So," he started, leaning against the railing that shivered slightly under his weight, "you do this a lot? Wander rooftops, evade traffic drones, generally make soldiers question their career choices." Elira tilted her head, ears twitching in amusement. "Depends. Today I'm in a very generous mood. Usually I just observe the chaos and take bets on who will trip first. Kale laughed despite himself. So basically, I'm your first champion. Champion, she said, pretending to consider it. Yes, I suppose you could be my champion, provided you survive the rest of the day without accidentally launching yourself into the stratosphere. That would be disappointing. They laughed together, the sound carried on the faintly ionized wind of Virelia's upper levels. It was ridiculous. It was unexpected. And yet it was the start of something neither of them could have predicted. But the galaxy had a habit of testing improbable alliances, and Kale had a feeling, one he didn't voice because he had learned long ago that such instincts often invited trouble, that Elira's presence in the city was going to be far more complicated than dodging drones or sarcastic insults. She moved with purpose, yet her purpose was hidden beneath layers of humor, defiance, and a mischievous glint in her eyes. He wondered what she was hiding and, more dangerously, why he cared so much. The sun, or whatever passed for a sun in this sector, was setting, casting long streaks of light across the skyway towers. Hovercrafts zipped past like bright needles threading the neon clouds. Kale adjusted his gloves, glanced at Elira, and thought about what an absurdly dangerous, wonderfully unpredictable day it had been. Somewhere behind them, a distant alarm drone whined, and he had no idea if it was for them or just the city complaining about poor maintenance. Either way, Elira turned, ears flicking impatiently, and motioned for him to follow. "Come on," she said. "I promise I won't try to kill you today, probably." Kale grinned, "That's reassuring, mostly." And so they ran, leaping across rooftops and slipping past neon-lit sentries, their laughter echoing through the city, a reckless little symphony in a galaxy that had long since forgotten how to smile. Somewhere, Kale knew, rules were being bent, perhaps a few laws broken, and it was entirely possible that he was about to make a very large number of people very angry. But for the moment, as Elira's long ears twitched beside him, the absurdity of their situation made it impossible to care. They were alive, they were running, and for the first time in a long while, Kale felt that chaos might not be the enemy. Kale had barely caught his breath before the next absurdity of Virelia decided to throw itself at him. Elira led him through a narrow tunnel beneath one of the city's older maglev tracks, a tunnel that smelled faintly of ozone, fried circuits, and something he suspected was expired moon cheese. She moved with effortless grace, long ears tracing subtle arcs in the low light, twitching whenever a maintenance sensor hummed too close to their heads. Kale, in contrast, tripped over a stray cable and nearly swallowed a discarded coolant container. "I swear," he muttered, brushing himself off, "these tunnels were designed by sadists who enjoy watching humans suffer." Elira chuckled, the sound bouncing off the tunnel walls like a music box with slightly broken springs. "You're exaggerating," she said, her silver hair catching what little light there was. "Mostly." Kale grunted, not entirely sure if she was comforting him or mocking him, which in Elira's case were often indistinguishable. "Mostly. I think we're already in the exaggeration phase of survival. I mean, look at me, I just did a full somersault over a coolant canister, and that's before breakfast." She raised an eyebrow and quipped, "Breakfast is overrated. Danger is underrated, you should start your day with both." He groaned but followed anyway, because Elira had this way of making him move fast and think slower than he ever thought possible. He had followed orders all his life, obeyed chain of command, adhered to galactic statutes, but something about her, the way she bent rules with a mischievous grin and didn't even glance at authority, made him question every regulation he'd ever lived by. Eventually, they surfaced in a quieter district of the city, one where abandoned factories had been converted into workshops for rogue engineers, smuggler dens, and the occasional experimental food vendor that sold floating pastries in zero-G syrup. Elira stopped in front of one such workshop, a squat metallic building that hummed and vibrated, apparently powered by the laughter of a dozen mischievous maintenance bots inside. "This is safe," she said, "ish." Hale narrowed his eyes. "Ish. That's a solid guarantee in the Virelian handbook." "Absolutely," she said, clicking her tongue. "It's the part right after expect explosions and before pretend you're an expert in quantum mechanics." Inside, the workshop smelled faintly of ozone, lubricants, and burning curiosity. Robots of all shapes and sizes whirred, floated, and occasionally screamed in binary as they tested new inventions. Elira moved confidently, tapping holographic interfaces with a flick of her hand, adjusting parameters that made Kale's brain short-circuit in ways that were both alarming and fascinating. One robot, a squat, boxy thing with googly optical sensors, rolled toward him, brandishing what looked like a mini laser cutter. Kale instinctively jumped back. "It's friendly," Elira said, "mostly." "I see a pattern here," he muttered, rubbing his shoulder where the robot had nudged him. "Mostly-ish, are you sure you're not just laughing at me?" She tilted her head, ears twitching in perfect unison. "Maybe a little. But also you're learning. Survival is part humor, part chaos, and part luck, mostly chaos, actually." Hale sighed, but there was a strange comfort in the absurdity. He had fought wars where bullets zipped past him faster than thought, yet he'd never encountered anything as challenging as surviving Elira's chaotic world without breaking into laughter or panic. She handed him a device, a small orb that hummed softly. "You'll need this," she said. "It's a tracker, but it also emits a mild repulsion field. Think of it as a polite way to keep enforcers from touching you, mostly polite. It will also occasionally play jazz music if you get too stressed." "Jazz music?" he asked, blinking. "You'd be surprised," she said. "Stress makes people do stupid things. Jazz helps sometimes." Hale shook his head but tucked the orb into his jacket. He knew this partnership was already absurd, but he had started to enjoy the chaos. They slipped out of the workshop, winding through narrow alleys where stray energy conduits sizzled overhead. Elira paused, ears flicking. "The authorities are tightening their nets," she said. "Not that it will matter too much. You have the tracking orb and I have, well, me." "Me being?" he asked, suspicious. "You'll see," she said, grinning. "Mostly it's best you don't know. Ignorance is bliss, mostly." The next hours were a blur of cityscape acrobatics, narrowly dodged surveillance drones, and improbable encounters with rogue AI street vendors that offered unsolicited life advice and occasionally threw exploding fruit at passers-by. Hale was exhausted, but he couldn't stop noticing Elira's long ears moving in rhythm with her thoughts, each twitch and curl communicating a subtext he could not read but somehow understood. There was humor in it, levity in the chaos, and an undeniable bond forming in the midst of absurd danger. Eventually, they reached a hidden docking bay where Elira's ship, a sleek vessel that resembled a hybrid between a manta ray and a reflective mirror, waited. She guided him inside, showing him controls that defied conventional physics, a navigation system that hummed with alien logic, and a cockpit view that stretched the entire spectrum of visible light. Kale, who had once piloted some of the most advanced human military crafts, felt entirely unqualified. "You fly?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. "Barely," he admitted. "Mostly I crash spectacularly. But I can probably manage a gentle glide into space without killing us both." "Mostly," she repeated, smirking. "We'll see." They lifted off smoothly, and Kale couldn't help but be impressed. Elira had built a world within this ship where rules were suggestions, physics was negotiable, and humor was a mandatory survival skill. As they navigated through the glowing rings of Virelia's upper atmosphere, Kale realized he didn't even care about the rules anymore. He cared about Elira, about the absurdity of their day, and about the strange thrill of defying authority in a galaxy that insisted everyone obeyed the unwritten laws of conformity. Hours passed, though time in Elira's ship was deceptive. They dodged patrol drones, outmaneuvered automated orbital sentries, and shared stories that were half-truths, half-jokes, each revelation wrapped in banter. Kale laughed more than he had in years, marveling at how dangerous things could feel simultaneously terrifying and absurdly hilarious. Finally, Elira guided the ship toward a hidden sector on the edge of the galactic fringe, a place where she said they could rest, plan, and, if necessary, plot the next improbable escape. Kale, leaning back in the zero-gravity seat, watched her long ears ripple in the soft interior lighting and felt an unfamiliar, unsettling, and thrilling warmth in his chest. This is insane," he said. "Mostly," Elira replied, grinning, "but that's the fun part. If it were boring, you'd be asleep in some desk by now. And you wouldn't have my company, which, let's be honest, is a galactic tragedy for anyone who has to miss it." Kale smiled despite himself. "I'm glad you're here." Her ears twitched, ears moving in a way he was slowly learning was her version of a smile. "Mostly glad," she teased. "Mostly." And as the stars stretched into streaks of color around them, Kale understood that the rules of Virlia, the expectations of the council, and even his own carefully ordered life had begun to unravel. Elira was the chaos he hadn't known he needed, the humor in the darkness, and perhaps, if he survived, the spark of something far more dangerous than any patrol drone or council decree. Hope. Cale Donovan had never considered himself a hero, and yet here he was, crouched behind a stack of obsolete cargo containers in the derelict upper orbital station of Virlia, listening to the whine of plasma rifles and the distant hum of gravlifts, wondering if this counted as a proper breakfast story. Elira crouched beside him, ears twitching like twin sentinels, her long silver hair falling in a halo that reflected the flickering emergency lights. "You realize," she said, voice low but carrying her usual playful edge, "that if anyone sees us here, they'll assume we're either insane or incredibly foolish." "Mostly both. I'll take mostly both," Cale muttered, adjusting the strap of his plasma sidearm. "It fits my resume. Also, insanity and foolishness seem like survival skills in your world." Elira tilted her head, her ears flicking sharply. "Mostly," she agreed, "though surviving is easier when you avoid being shot." They had been cornered. The Galactic Council's enforcers had traced Elira here, convinced that capturing her would restore the illusion of order. Cale had expected a tactical advantage, an empty, abandoned station. But what awaited them were not empty corridors, but a gauntlet of grav-field anomalies, rogue maintenance drones, and a squad of enforcers who clearly believed in doing things by the book, and by the book only. Cale swallowed, "So plan." Elira smirked, one corner of her mouth twitching, ears flicking with excitement. "Plan," she said, tapping her wrist-mounted interface, "is mostly improvisation with a generous dash of chaos." "I thought you liked that part." "Mostly," he echoed. They moved, slipping through corridors where gravity pulled sideways or not at all, forcing Cale to hop, tumble, and occasionally collide with stray storage crates that protested with metallic groans. Elira guided him with gestures and occasional nudges of her elbow, her long ears sweeping hazards away in a manner both elegant and oddly comical. At one point, a drone bearing the insignia of the council lurched toward them, and Elira flicked a switch on her interface. The drone spun in place, emitting what could only be described as an electronic rendition of a honking clown horn before collapsing in a heap. Cale blinked. "I love your methods," he said, trying to catch his breath. "Mostly effective," she corrected. "Also mostly illegal, but you knew that already." They reached the core chamber of the station, a massive circular room with a central gravlift that hummed ominously. The enforcers had gathered there, their plasma rifles trained, confident that the outcast alien would be subdued easily. Cale's hand went to his sidearm, but Elira put a finger on his chest. "Mostly subtle," she whispered. Then she did something entirely unexpected. She tapped a sequence on her wrist interface, and the lights flickered wildly, the gravlifts reversed, and the room itself seemed to twist in physics that made Cale's stomach somersault. The enforcers stumbled, shouting in confusion, while Elira leapt forward, her long ears glinting as she moved like a silver streak. Cale followed, firing non-lethal plasma shots that pinged off walls and occasionally forced a shout or two. Humor, he realized, could be tactical. One enforcer lunged at Elira. Cale rolled, grabbed a stray pipe, and swung it just enough to nudge the attacker into the gravlift. "Mostly luck," he muttered, realizing he was enjoying himself in a way he hadn't since basic training, before war had drained the color from everything. They reached the outer docking bay, Elira's ship waiting, engines humming like a cat purring in zero-G. Cale turned back to see a final squad of enforcers approaching, but Elira waved a hand, her interface producing a holographic duplicate of herself, twirling and gesturing wildly. The enforcers paused, then opened fire on the illusion. Cale laughed, "Mostly genius." Elira grinned. "Mostly," she said. "Mostly genius, mostly chaos, mostly us surviving, you're catching on." They slipped into the ship, engines flaring as they blasted away from the orbital station. Cale settled into the pilot's seat, watching Virlia shrink beneath them in a whirl of neon and shadow. He realized he had changed. The rigid boundaries he had once revered were now meaningless, replaced by a new understanding. Courage was not just about following orders, and love, whatever that meant, was worth bending laws and risking everything. Elira leaned against the console, her long ears brushing a panel and causing a minor electrical surge that made Kale yelp. "Mostly careful," she teased. "Mostly," he replied, grinning despite himself. They left Virelia behind, navigating into the uncharted outskirts of the galaxy where rules were suggestions, gravity was negotiable, and humor was as critical as oxygen. Elira taught him to read alien navigation patterns, showing how even physics could be playful when approached creatively. Kale taught her patience, the kind that comes from trusting someone entirely, and mostly he taught himself that vulnerability was not weakness. Weeks passed, though time was deceptive. They visited fringe colonies, evaded council patrols, and witnessed phenomena that defied all human understanding: planets where the atmosphere shimmered with liquid light, moons orbiting in chaotic patterns that somehow formed geometric poetry, and nebulae that hummed with frequencies that could alter mood. Through it all, they laughed, argued, and shared stories, their bond deepening in ways neither fully expected. Kale had learned that humor could disarm fear, that rules were tools, not masters, and that love could flourish even amidst cosmic chaos. Finally, they arrived at a secluded asteroid base, far from the Council's reach, a place Elira had built as a sanctuary. Kale stepped onto the surface, watching stars stretch endlessly across the void. Elira's ears flicked in a subtle, expressive rhythm he had learned to interpret as contentment. "Mostly safe," she said, "mostly." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of every choice that had brought him here. "Mostly," he echoed. They sat side by side, looking at the galaxy that sprawled infinitely before them. No laws pressed down, no enforcers threatened, no crates rattled in the shadows. They were alive, they were free, and they had chosen each other in a universe that seemed determined to deny connection at every turn. Elira rested her head lightly against his shoulder, ears curling softly, and Kale realized that the courage to act, the humor to endure, and the love to challenge everything had reshaped him entirely. "I never thought," he said quietly, "that breaking the rules could feel this right." "Mostly," Elira replied, "mostly everything you never knew you needed." Kale smiled, the kind of smile that reached eyes and heart alike. "Mostly perfect," he said. And in the silence that followed, filled with the hum of distant stars and the faint music of the asteroid's artificial gravity systems, Kale understood that their journey had not only saved Elira, it had transformed him, proving that love, courage, and laughter could coexist even in the most chaotic corners of the galaxy. They stayed there together, watching the universe unfold, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as one. A human soldier and the alien woman with the long ears who had taught him that mostly, life was meant to be lived boldly, humorously, and without apology.